Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Invisible Museum Live on Facebook, brought to you by Royal Talents of North America. My name is Jeff Olson, today Cavalier Jeff, and I am the Art Education Director for Royal Talents North America, and I will be your co-host. Today, if you like and follow us on Facebook, reside in Canada or the U.S., you'll be eligible to win your very own set of Rembrandt oil paints, so make sure you stick with us through to the end. My co-host and true star of the show is the incomparable Zhenya Gershman. Zhenya, hello.
Hello, thank you for having me.
For those of you who don't know Zhenya, if that is possible now, I mean, right? Her art is featured in prominent private and public collections across the globe. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Alex Award in the Visual Arts, presented nationally to honored scholars and artists. Congratulations, Zhenya.
Thank you.
She's an art historian and educator. She worked at the Getty for over a decade, and her scholarly work is dedicated to uncovering new perspectives regarding the life and work of old masters, which would be perfect for today's subject. She is the co-founder of the nonprofit Project Ah and the founder of the Z Academy, where she mentors students of all ages based on her own experiences and the techniques of the old masters. And you can learn more about the Z Academy at zartacademy.org, so please check that out. What do we got today, Zhenya?
We've got one of the most, if not the most famous artist who ever lived or who will ever live, who needs no introduction, and his name is Vermeer. And I'm so excited, I can hardly hold myself back because
me too.
the art is really all about story and storytelling. And today, boy, do I have stories for you. So I hope I don't get carried away too much and that we don't spend the rest of your day off today. I know for many of you it's a holiday in America, but I am truly excited. I'll try to shorten it if need be, but perhaps you'll get so into it that even an hour and a half would be so intense for you, as I hope it will be. So I want to start actually with Vermeer, not what we do know, but what we don't know. And what's so amazing that for the artist that is so that famous, that we know very, very little. And first of all, one of the most amazing things about him, that not one drawing survives by him. Another thing that's amazing, not one written document signed by him survives. It is as if he never existed, right? And when we think about the most famous painter, only about 36 paintings, about 35 paintings that are admittedly Vermeer, survive. So little production, each one a jewel. How did he do it? And perhaps we come to the most interesting part before I even bring on our slides, is how did he learn to be Vermeer? Who taught Vermeer? I mean, I'm a teacher. You know, I always love when people mention my school, like you mentioned, the Art Academy. Where did he go to learn? And we know he had to learn because he was admitted in Delft, where Delft was considered a very famous Delft school of the Golden Age. And so the level of painters was very high. He was admitted to the Guild of the Master in the master status. You ready for that? Age 21. And the prerequisite to become a master at the Guild of St. Luke in Delft was at least 6-year training by a great school or master, right? A school of the master, because they didn't have official academies like we do today. Right. But not one document survives of a teacher claiming Vermeer, right? Number one. Number two, he came from a very poor, struggling family. His father was a textile maker, an art dealer, and a hotel renter. He rented hotels, rooms. And so he was struggling. We know that at that age, at 21, when Vermeer becomes the guild master, his father had for the last 5 years where he would have studied, not a penny to pay for his expensive art education. Art education was as expensive as it is in private schools today. And moreover, you see, we don't even look at art of Vermeer yet. There's all these mysteries before we get to actually look at it. Moreover, there is no other artist that could have trained him because his work doesn't look like anybody else. And with that is how I wanted to begin today. So let me hook up our PowerPoint. I bring it to you. You are sharing your screen. So let's see if I can Good to you. Okay. And Jeff, tell me if you see the screen.
I see the screen.
Okay. Here we go.
We
Invisible Museum Tours. Strap your belts. Off we go. And the very first man I show to you is obviously a photograph, so it can't be Vermeer, but it's somebody who's extremely important to us. Why do I start with him and not Vermeer's paintings? Because this is the man, Théophile Thoré-Berger, who discovered Vermeer. Vermeer gets forgotten for 200 years. That's another mystery around his life. And this man, look at, he's no easy fellow. Look at that intense gaze. This is a photograph taken by a very famous French photographer, Nadar, taken around 1865. Around this very same time, Théophile Thoré, he has two names, Thoré-Berger, because he was actually a political journalist and he was exiled out of France for some of the havoc he caused. And he adopted a second name, Berger, as this pseudonym. Right, so we know him as Thoré-Berger. I do want you to remember his name because without him we don't have Vermeer today. Right? He goes to Hague, to Holland, to a museum that is now still there, Maurits's house, the Royal House collection, and he sees Vermeer there. And he's so taken by what he sees that he says, who is this artist? There's Rembrandts in that museum all over the place. I'm not even looking at Rembrandt. I can't stop thinking about this painting. And so he continues to search who was Vermeer and to find and collect his paintings again as an oeuvre and present him back to the world. And this is his quote. This is what Théophile says. How was it that one knew nothing of an artist who equals, if he does not surpass, Peter de Hoek and Metsu? And you can add any other Dutch name afterwards, Rembrandt, wherever you want on that list, right? He said that to himself. How is this possible? How do you forget somebody like that, right? All right, so let me just make sure.
I have a theory, but I'm going to save it for the end.
All right. And this is also a wonderful quote by Théophile. He says, this obsession, it becomes an obsession, has caused me considerable expense. He actually starts collecting these Vermeers. You could still buy them. To see one picture by Van der Meer. Why does he call Vermeer Van der Meer? Because Vermeer is actually a short name for Van der Meer, from the lake. A short Vermeer, from the lake. So official name of Vermeer is Van der Meer. I traveled hundreds of miles to obtain a photograph of another Van der Meer. I was madly extravagant, right? So I just want you to remember this one man who's collecting Vermeer. And finally, we get to Vermeer with this longest introduction of Invisible Museum Tour, because truly Vermeer was invisible at the time. And this is the very painting that Théophile stood in front of that stopped him at Maurits's house, and he looked at it. This large view of Delft. Look at the size of this painting. This is almost 40 by 47 inches. It's huge, right? It's overpowering compared to tiny little paintings usually that we know by the Dutch artist. And what is this monumental historical scale painting of? Of nothing. It is just a slice of everyday life, of a cloudy day, of a still water in the canal, of the little gossips on the shore, and the perfect, quiet, still moment. This is where our collector and our historian, Thoré-Berger, who incidentally, he did not just discover Vermeer, he also rediscovered Hals, Frans Hals. What a man he was. It just if I had a hat like Jeff, I would take off my hat for Thoré-Berger. And so what was this about this painting? I really want to delve into it for a moment and see, why was it this? Why wasn't it Rembrandt? Why wasn't it somebody else that stopped him in his tracks? And we start to get used to Vermeer's famous vision of light, right? It's really not about even what we see. It's how light renders what we see. And remember, for the longest time, through medieval ages, it was considered that human eye did not receive the light, that it actually projected the light out. And for that, that's why we get the superstition of evil eye, because if you have negative energy and you look at someone with a bad eye, you're projecting that bad light and will ruin their life, right? So for the longest time, it was artists truly, along with the scientists, who understood how light works. And Vermeer is on the verge of that scientific discovery. And as we close in a little bit on the details, here are just these two anonymous ladies, and I just love them because they're simply gossiping. Now, this is not Mary and Christ or a royalty, and yet in that little apron of the gossiping woman on the shore is lapis lazuli, the most expensive blue that you would find typically reserved for saints or royalty. In that pedestrian moment, he's thinking about how to use the paint, how to reflect the light, all of these different blues and yellows. But what's most amazing is that this painting is made in around 1660. And around this time, just a few years ago, there was a huge monumental event in the life of Delft. And that was the huge explosion. It was called the thunderclap in Dutch. Huge gunpowder that was collected in the city center exploded, and it destroyed the city. This is the view of Delft by another artist. His name is Der Pol, and we see this painting from 1654. Let's close up a little bit. This is almost the same view, but we see death. We see ominous gray smoke. We see the birds of prey coming in as the bodies are decomposing. Total chaos. Now, this was not just some event in the middle of the city. It touched upon everybody in the city, because whoever was around or had shops also died or lost their possessions. One of the greatest artists who lived in Delft, Carl Fabritius, who was the most talented Rembrandt student who moved from Amsterdam to Delft, died in this explosion. Some people say perhaps even Vermeer had studied with him at some point. So this is something that couldn't have escaped Vermeer's attention. This was a really huge, monumental national disaster. So let's compare the two views. Nothing could be more different. And here we start to get a glimpse of Vermeer's personality. Vermeer does not paint reality. He paints an escape from reality. It's a very different thing. We think these are photorealistic. They're not. They're completely constructed events. Everything you see is basically the interior landscape of Vermeer. It is not exterior landscape. It is what is happening, perhaps what he wishes for. I'll give you another example. Vermeer, alongside producing not so many paintings, 35 paintings, produced almost more children than paintings. He had 11 to 15 children, depending on whose account you're going by, 4 of which were not even accounted for because they died before they were baptized, so don't even count them. So at least 11. And in not one, imagine being a father of at least 11 children and living in a small Dutch home, a townhouse with all the havoc and noise and running and playing and screaming. Not in one of his paintings do we see a scene of a child and a mother. Not in one. There's one painting where there's a street view. Perhaps there's a child playing, but it's not really clear. But there is no scenes of busy, noisy household with children or mothers with children, which would have been the subject that was closest to his heart. He was very happily married, adored his wife, but nowhere we meet Vermeer as the father. So I want to put this as a kind of in the back of your mind. Was Vermeer a realistic painter? What is Vermeer's reality? We call this episode Vermeer's views, right? Vermeer's point of view or vision, Vermeer's vision. What was Vermeer's vision? Now, talk about stories. This particular painting, around the same time as Vermeer is almost discovered, appears in one of the most important writers of 19th century, Marcel Proust. And so remember, Vermeer is recently rediscovered. He becomes one of the beloved painters for many, especially for Marcel Proust. And Marcel Proust works in a character who actually describes this very view of Delft that you see right now. Not only he describes this in his very famous book at the lost time, in the search of the lost time, but he actually weaves a very dramatic event. A man who's at his deathbed reads a review that Vermeer's painting arrived to Paris, and a critic mentions it in this review that there's something extraordinary about it. So this man who is dying says, it's worthwhile to go and see it in person. He actually goes to see the painting and dies in front of it. And so this is pretty dramatic. First question of the day, would it be worth to see Vermeer and die in front of it, as take your last living breath in front of it? So while you look at this painting, let's actually go and look at the larger view. I'd like to, if you don't mind, share the quote from you directly from the book. Would you mind, Jeff?
No, please.
Okay. I'll try to do my dramatic reading. I practiced on my daughter this morning, and she survived, so I'll try here. Okay. The circumstances of his death were as follows. A fairly mild attack of uremia had led to his being ordered to rest. But an art critic, having written somewhere that in Vermeer's view of Delft, lent by the gallery at The Hague for an exhibition of Dutch painting, a picture which he adored and imagined that he knew by heart, a little patch of yellow wall, which he could not remember, was so well painted that it was, if one looked at it by itself, like some priceless specimen of Chinese art, of a beauty that was sufficient in itself. Bergot ate a few potatoes, left the house, and went to the exhibition. At the first few steps he had to climb, he was overcome by an attack of dizziness. He walked past several pictures and was struck by the aridity and pointlessness of such an artificial kind of art, which was greatly inferior to the sunshine of a windswept Venetian palazzo or of an ordinary house by the sea. At last he came to the Vermeer, which he remembered as most striking, more different from anything else he knew, but in which, thanks to the critic's article, he noticed for the first time some small figures in blue, that the sand was pink, and finally, the precious substance of the tiny patch of yellow wall. His dizziness increased. He fixed his gaze like a child upon a yellow butterfly that he wants to catch on a precious little patch of wall. And if we were to read on, then he basically dies. So when we look at this painting together, so many had torn their hair out saying which exactly patch of yellow wall was Proust remarking on. And there are actually articles and books written about this. Some people say it's up to the left. Some say it's in the distance on the right. Some people say it's in the shore. There's so much interesting that it became so real. This painting became so real through this great writer. I hope that it stopped you in the tracks, the way the beauty in which Proust describes this painting. Jeff, what do you think?
I am going to make a hypothesis here, and so much of Vermeer's work is a construction, like you were saying. It's Vermeer's world, it's his vision. I wonder if the writer, Proust, is doing the same thing here, that patch of yellow wall. Does it really exist, or is it something of his own invention? We scan and seek for little bits of yellow wall, and I'm sure there are ones there, but is it what he actually sees in the painting, or is he emulating Vermeer and creating a world within the mind's eye?
Jeff, this is why I love teaching with you and collaborating with you. You set me up just for that, without knowing, because I keep
rehearsal here, folks.
Yeah, I keep his PowerPoint secret from Jeff because I want him to be fresh when he sees it with you. So I come to you to one of my personal favorites of Vermeer. And if I skip just very quickly, this is a painting in the Rijksmuseum. I hope Rijksmuseums will be watching this tour as well with us. And I hope we get to travel there in person one day, the Milkmaid. And I skip to the very heart of this painting, to me, from this, the little patch of the wall. And if I For many years that I've been teaching in my studio, when I teach my students, I always, without studying about Vermeer, I always said, Vermeer is about painting walls. This was my favorite line. All my students are watching today. They know that. So to me, Proust is looking at the essence of Vermeer. Now, both Jeff and I are painters, so we can relate. Many painters are watching. If you're a collector, you can relate as well. The wall for the artist is the most important thing because that's how you display your art. We're always fighting for a little patch of the wall to actually display our painting. So in the domestic setting, we always see Vermeer's painting almost in the same room, almost in the same corner, almost at the same window. Everything else changes. The women come and go, the still lifes come and go, the drapery come and go, the wall stays. The wall is his wife. The wall is his muse. The wall is his security. And what's amazing about this wall, this is an old friend. It's covered with dirt and light and not only nails where art would have hung, but even little marks where nails have been removed and it left a hole in the wall, a memory of something of artistic that used to hang there. We know that in this particular painting there used to be a map, which he loves often displaying in his rooms behind the milkmaid, that for some reason he decides to paint out, but the nail on which the map would have hung, he left. And I just love, if I was Proust, I would not only write, giving idea to Proust here, Zhenya. I would not only write about the wall, I would write about the shadow from the nail that it cast on that wall. I would write from the hole, the mark, the scar that's left on that wall. And so I just really wanted to direct you. This is my transition in kind of showing you who Vermeer is. Again, Vermeer's vision. What is he choosing and focusing? No other artist loved the wall as much as Vermeer before or after. Impossible. If you find me another artist, I'll give up. But this is it, in my opinion. But what is this painting truly about? It is about a milkmaid, and that is significant. I mean, if we don't say it's about the wall, she's our second character. Let's say the wall is the first character. She's a second character, and this is really, really curious because it's a typically Baroque painting. If we had to define what Baroque is, it's basically a contrast of light and dark with a painting that shows a moment, a transitory moment between two actions. It's not her picking up the picture, and it's not completing the pouring. It's the in-between moment. It is that she is doing it in process. And that's really amazing as we look at, I don't have that detail right here, but let's go back and see. The fact that the milk is pouring, that umbilical cord between the two openings, the one that she's holding of the pitcher and the receiver where the milk is coming in, that string of white that's connecting that moment and been connecting that moment for nearly 400 years, right? And instead of focusing these Baroque moments in Baroque art are usually, again, a huge mythological subject. Let's say it was Joseph and his cloak, and he's being seduced by Potiphar's wife, and they're fighting over that cloak. And the viewer says, oh, I recognize that moment. And they try to fill in what happened before, and they try to show off what will happen after. And you can have fabulous conversations with your friends and say that you're so erudite. What could you possibly be talking about? Okay, the milkmaid just picked up the pitcher. How exciting. And a moment later, the milkmaid will put down the pitcher. So we're not talking historical, mythological, religious, fabulous, even like Proust literature. We are down to the prosaic moment. Now, with all that said, you'd think that the milk is the most important part. You'd think that the milk is the focal point of that painting. Now, something happens when you teach with art, when you copy art, when you imitate the art, when you try to get closer to it. I was teaching one of my students how to paint Vermeer's face. And we were looking at this, and it came to the point where I had to demonstrate the eyes. Now notice that the eyes are really foggy here, in the dark, nothing outlined. And so how do you show your student how to paint that effect? I had to actually explain where are the irises, where's the pupil, right? Where's the lid? And now, Jeff, tell me, She's supposed to be looking at the milk pouring down, concentrating on the moment. If she takes her gaze away, she'll spill everywhere. Where is she looking with her eyes?
Well, all the vanishing point seems to me to be almost at her arm or elbow. She seems to be looking down at the arm, the strength in her arm.
Correct. She's not looking at where the viewers are looking. Isn't that incredible? She's about to spill. If this was real life, she's going to splash. This is going to be the ginormous accident, right? So if we follow that gaze, and you're absolutely right, and I felt like this was the biggest discovery of a century when I was, you can have these mini discoveries when you paint, right? And you connect with the artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like this was a major discovery for myself. And so here she's looking past towards the elbow, as you said. And if we continue with the composition, it actually starts to accent that she's looking down below to the object in the corner. Do you see how it's almost lit up, right? Do you
Mm-hmm.
recognize this little object?
I don't.
So what this is actually, it appears on almost every Dutch painting of our everyday scene of this genre paintings, especially when there are women involved, because it was very, very cold in the house. And this was a foot warmer. And the woman would put little bit of burning coals inside, and usually put her foot on top of it, and open the dress will billow above it, and would warm her up, would create a kind of like a heating pad, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for the Dutch, it became something that they really identified, but also tongue-in-cheek, thought of actually as sexual metaphor, because truly the woman gets hot, right? Heated by this device, on fire. You can use the same English words that we would use in Dutch to see the play on the meaning. And what's really interesting, that behind this, and this is what Vermeer's vision, it's all in the detail. It's all somewhere like we were looking at the little hole in the wall, right? Behind this object, we find tiles. And on the left, you'll actually recognize there is a Cupid with a bow. And so perhaps this woman is not thinking about pouring of the milk, but actually is distracted by something on her heart, a love affair, a man she's fantasizing about, a story she had read and moved her. So this is how he weaves his narrative, right? We talked about the Baroque moment. And it's somewhere outside of the main areas of the painting, which is fascinating. Now, if we talk a little bit about Vermeer's biography, some of the things came to view not long ago in the 20th century. There were some incredible documents that surfaced that talk about his family life. And we found out that he was married to a woman who had a lot of family troubles from her father's side, and her brother was a very violent man. And at one point, when Vermeer's wife was pregnant, very heavily pregnant, her brother stormed one day when Vermeer wasn't at home and demanded some money and threw in some kind of an iron tool at her belly. And it was her milkmaid at the house that stepped in and protected the pregnant woman and threw him out of the house. So when we add a little bit of a biography, that little glimpse that we know of Vermeer, this woman, this milkmaid, becomes monumental hero. It becomes this, all of a sudden, a heroic painting. So who knows if that's really true and that's what he's thinking about, but just throw all these different aspects. This could be a painting about a wall like we talked about. This could be painting about just the everyday life and the beauty of pouring the milk. This could be a romantic interlude, or this could be biographical, or all of them together. Now, what I wanted to attract your attention is actually how this painting is made. So as we get closer to the details, this is a bread basket, but it is not what you expect as you look at this painting from far away, right? Look at how slick and photographic it looks. And as we get closer, what we start noticing, incredible texture. Texture to the point where it stops making sense. Because, okay, you could say that there's texture on the bread, but why is there texture on the little cloth? That same little dots. Do you notice these little dots, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what's so distinct about Vermeer. When you get close to them, they're actually very abstract and loosely painted. They are deceptive. I know Jeff loves to experiment with paint. You would probably invite Vermeer for one of your conversations and demonstrating Rembrandt paint, because he's just so playful, right? And for this very reason, there was a hypothesis put forward by David Hockney in his wonderful book, The Secret Knowledge, and in a film called Tim's Vermeer, and by other scholars, that perhaps Vermeer used lenses to project the images, which would have allowed him to see what the naked eye cannot see. So if we take a photographic image and we blow it up, there's a certain degree of pixelation. And this is very familiar to us, but of course we're looking at 17th century painting. We see basically pixelation in his works of art. The speculation was that he used the lenses to project his images, to trace the image onto his canvas, and therefore would observe this various photorealistic effect, not realistic, photorealistic, what happens in the camera and in the projection. Now, I put it in the back of your mind because we're going to test this theory a little bit. And we see here again this pixelation, this amazing detail. I attract your attention. I mean, only Vermeer would do that. Look at the window. It's not just about the light. One of the window panes is cracked and broken. I mean, who would care to paint such a detail, right? Again, these theorists would say that's because he's using camera obscura, a device that's helping him see. We're going to test it in just a moment. But one thing that I want to put in your mind, if he did use it, would that be called cheating? Is projecting an image to capture it a cheating device? Now, one thing that's very interesting in Vermeer's biography, remember, he doesn't come from a wealthy family. He doesn't come from artistic family. And in his lineage, his grandparents and his uncle, they're counterfeiters. They were counterfeiters. His uncle was actually caught for copying and counterfeiting money. The partner of his uncle was thrown to jail and beheaded. My question to you, one rhetorical question is this idea of counterfeiting, which is copying nature, mimicking nature, almost in a magical kind of way, can it be also charged with negativity and positivity? Could you be copying coins and cheating and going to jail? Or playing with reality, playing with our vision, asking us to reconsider how we see, and therefore counterfeiting of life becomes something magical and positive. So very interesting parallel, right? Not just thinking of it one way, but I throw that out to you. And we come to a very important man in our PowerPoint. And what's interesting, this theory, just go back for a second, this theory of lenses does not hold up simply because when Vermeer died, there was an inventory, and there was not one lens or anything like a tool, like a lens, in his house, right? Everything was detailed inventory. So such a device was not present. That's one of the reasons why this theory doesn't really hold up. But if he did see lenses, if they were outside of his house, who would have given it to him? And it's this guy. Now, do you know, Jeff, have you met Leeuwenhoek before?
I have.
In
Amazing,
what capacity?
huh?
In what capacity have you come across
I
Leeuwenhoek?
have one in my life too.
Really? Okay. So Leeuwenhoek was an amateur scientist, but that did not prevent him to become the most important scientist of the Golden Age. Probably for 200 years forward, he's considered the most important inventor. This is probably one of the only times my husband, Dr. Pepper, not to be confused with Dr. Pepper, the drink, who is a microbiologist, became so handy in preparation for this tour because Leeuwenhoek became the father of microbiology. Backtrack. Look at this man. He was not a scientist. He was an expert in weaving and fabric making. And his first impulse to study with lenses and magnification came from forgery. We talked about counterfeiting. And he wanted to look at the quality of thread that's being sold to him under the microscope to make sure the threads will last and were authentic. And so what do you do if you're in 17th century and you want that kind of scientific thing? Leeuwenhoek just builds a microscope. No big deal, right? I mean, think about what a genius he was. You know, you're a fabric weaver and you just happen to build a microscope. The microscope that he builds as an amateur is 300 magnification, some say 500 magnification, which is cutting-edge science in the world at the time, anywhere in the world. And he bends his own lenses. He heats and bends. He understands how glass works. Incredible man. And what's so interesting, so he's an inventor of microbiology, because when he starts looking at underneath at the thread, he notices little beings there. He calls them animalcules. It's basically one-cell organism, and everybody thinks he's crazy, right? Because he's seeing little guys under the microscope. But he invents microbiology, and what's so interesting, he's also an amateur artist. He creates the first microbiological drawings. So this is an image of wood seen under magnification, and what do we see? We see these little cells, these little circles, right? Take a look at Vermeer. Now, Vermeer's father was also a weaver in Delft, a business, the same business as Leeuwenhoek. And so we think that he had a direct connection. They're tradesmen, they're colleagues, right? And there was this, we know already in Vermeer, this interest in vision, this interest in optics. It is very likely that Leeuwenhoek would have given him his opportunity at his house to look through microscope, to look through his lenses, and what would they see? Jeff, this is the most important part for me to relate to our audience. What they would see is what the human eye cannot see. What they thought God's eye could see. And therefore you need the lens to see what we're really made of. Imagine previous painters painted the sky and heavens open and you see God above. They're doing the opposite. They're looking down below through a lens, under microscopic lens, to see what, again, down in invisible realm. This is perfect for an invisible museum tour. They're really looking for the invisible, and this is a moment where science and religion do not diverge. One proves the other. For them, this is the miracle. And so if you want to think about this, look at Vermeer's detail on the left, just the way the light, those little particles of light play on the lips, and then the fabric on the right that I show you. We'll look at that image in a moment. Just the way it plays on the threads. This is for Vermeer to say, we see threads, we see mouth, but below it is divine composition, those animalcules that live there, that compose our, the world that is unseen. So instead of painting what's visible, he's literally, in my opinion, painting what's invisible. These are the two paintings, the geographer and the astronomer, that are considered pendants by Vermeer. And many believe that these are a portrait of Leeuwenhoek. These amazing two paintings. I just want to compare the geographer here. And actually they wear the same silk, oriental silk robe. This was considered an outfit, a proper outfit for a scientist at home. And we see Leeuwenhoek holding the dividers. We see the geographer in his hand in Vermeer's portrait. By the way, this Leeuwenhoek was by a different artist, by Verkolge, and that's again in Rijksmuseum as well. And so we're now comparing the non-Vermeer to a Vermeer on the right. And so there is a certain parallel between these paintings, but you could also see that the two men could not look more different. In my opinion, this is not a portrait. It is more an inspired vision of a scientist who is connecting to the world. This geographer is looking outside the window for inspiration, for divine inspiration. The light comes in and illuminates his world and illuminates his studies, and is supposed to open something again that I think is invisible. Now, this is also inspired by an earlier print. This is by Rembrandt. This would have been circulated, incredibly famous, and definitely something that Fabricius, remember the man who was in an explosion, could have exposed Vermeer to. But the composition is undeniable. That Vermeer is looking at Rembrandt here is very obvious. The most amazing part to me is both men, the alchemist in Vermeer, or the Kabbalist the alchemist and Kabbalist in Rembrandt, and the geographer in Vermeer, they're both not sitting, they're standing. And this is really amazing because both are looking at the revelation outside the window as if they're seeing something that made them stand up. Right now, Jeff, you're sitting down. Imagine something distracted your attention with some kind of a divine sign that you left all of our audience right now, just stood up to look up at it, right? Amazing parallel here. Now, what's even more interesting, if we go closer and look at the book in Vermeer, it was identified by an art historian, James Villou. He identified that the text that the geographer is looking is actually 1621, second edition by a scientist, Adrian Metius, who wrote instruction in astronomy and geography. And he was able to identify that this is volume 3 of that text.
Isn't that incredible?
It's absolutely incredible. And why I bring your attention to this, because in this text, the writer draws our attention that science is great, but it is nothing. If you have your instruments, and if you have your measurements, and if you have your knowledge, it is nothing without God's inspiration. And so there's a wonderful parallel here between Leeuwenhoek, between Vermeer, between Rembrandt, for, again, looking through the lens, not for cheating purposes, but for what I want to kind of open up for a viewer, for beyond what our eye can see, which is an oxymoron, because painting is something we're supposed to look at. But they're trying to show you beyond the painting, through the painting, through the reality, uber reality. And that's what I wanted to open up to you a little bit today. We're going to keep going, but Jeff, interrupt me if there's any questions or anything that's
There's some questions back on the camera obscura theory, so I think we can address those as we get farther along again.
Exactly.
Because there's a lot going on there, and I just love that image. And light is so important to him, right? To seek the truth and knowing it, give light to those whom we may be associated. It's really at the heart of a lot of the story that he tells, isn't it?
Exactly. So remember what I was trying to point out, not the eye projecting the light, but the light carrying the image. This is how photography works, right? This is how camera obscura works. You make a pinhole, light penetrates that dark space. You're basically inside a camera, an amateur camera, and an image is carried. To understand that is to then not paint the picture, but to paint the light that carries the picture.
It is revolutionary, isn't it? It really
revolutionary.
Is.
It's a change. It's no longer photographic. It's actually about how we perceive light, how we perceive images. Okay, so I go to you. We go from this divine inspiration, and there is a test. Get ready. Poor Jeff, because he's the audience, represents the audience. He's always the one to be tested. So get ready. So this is Vermeer's one of the smallest images. I just draw your attention. It's at the Louvre Museum, and you travel to see, of course, Mona Lisa there. But this tiny little painting is equally important. And it's only 9 inches by 8 inches. So it's smaller than the legal sheet of paper. Just absolutely remarkable. It holds the room. It will hold thousands of people in front of it easily, right? Tiny little jewel. And what is it? It's a picture of even less than the milkmaid. The milkmaid, let's say exciting. This is just lace maker. It's just little threads that she's pulling. And what I wanted to attract your attention, that this idea of weaver, a lace maker, a woman who is weaving, was actually championed by another Dutch artist whose name is Nicolas Maas. This is one of the early paintings. This is 1655, Vermeer about 1670. So it's quite after Maas' image. And I want you to look at the two side by side. And though the subject is the same, There could be nothing more different between these two paintings. So I want to also remind you, if you're a very good student and you watched our previous Invisible Museum tour, what does it remind you of, Jeff?
This particular painting?
The painting, the idea of thread, a woman with thread.
Oh my gosh. I'm
You were
totally
there.
blanking on it.
You were definitely there.
Um,
Remember, remember the Mary?
I do remember the cord from the last one, and we spoke a lot about the importance of the cord and the connection in the subject matter. But
Yes,
that's
you
it.
absolutely nailed it. And sorry to make you sweat a little bit. It wouldn't be fun without it. But you are as smart as you are. You remembered. I hope our viewers remember. And if you haven't seen it, please watch our previous episode on motherhood, sacred motherhood. And we watched that during the symbols of Annunciation. Mary's often shown holding a thread, as if to refer to the thread of life, right? We talked about many, many, many possibilities. So here it seems like the subject matter is diluted to a woman with thread, the woman who is a mother, the maker of the home, the maker of the future, the maker of the flesh, of the son, of the daughter, to this image, this quintessential image of thread weaving, right? But now, and I wonder if our audience could help Jeff so he's not all by himself. So please start typing away. What do you see? I mentioned that I see these two as different. Could you help us out and see the differences between these two images? And while you type it away, Jeff, if you want to kick us off, what's different here?
Well, the thing that always struck me about this painting is the emphasis on the tools. And this is very illustrated, I think, in just what you were talking about, being able to identify the exact text that the geographer was working from. When he tells a story, he spends so much time giving us detail to be able to identify everything that's within the picture in terms of the narrative. And I think the same is true here. You don't see that. The other one is kind of a simple genre painter. We have a woman at work. She happens to be doing needlework. But the task itself is less important than the idea of just the scene. Here, the task is central. She's creating something very specific and is using specific tools for them. And we're seeing the materials that go into the work. There's a story that's being told that's much further along than just a simple genre painting.
This is why I keep quiet. I couldn't have said it better. Uh, just got to put Jeff on the spot, and he does it just so eloquently. I wonder if any viewers have anything to add to it. Jeff, let me
We've got,
know.
yeah, lots of the same things, the microscopic detail of it compared to the other, the window light versus the candle light. I love that one. That's from John. Rita was the microscopic details. We've got the simple background in the Vermeer, the focus on the detail in her hands. The color of the threads, where we can't even really see the thread. Part of it's probably the image quality, but that's not what the emphasis is, right?
Correct.
So that was a great catch. Just the detail, the focus, the light direction itself. Lots of great catches, lots of great comments.
We love our audience. Thank you, guys. Thank you for commenting, and keep this coming, because that's what really makes it interesting for Jeff and I. We're not just talking to each other. We're really talking to you. And so these comments are all beautiful. And the detail that you notice is amazing. And I flashed already a close-up. But what's paradoxical here, that the more detail we see, the more abstractly it's painted. Now
Mm-hmm.
look at these threads. This is Jackson Pollock, before Jackson Pollock, right? When he's just throwing paint. And it's just so incredible that focus becomes the threads that's coming out here and thrown nonchalantly. Now, I remind you that it was the thread experiment that actually led Leeuwenhoek to build his microscope and look at the lenses. So very likely that he showed the threads under the microscope to Vermeer, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing science and art coming together here. That is why the thread is at the heart of this painting, and in the other one, it's not. right? This is our audience brilliantly, and Jeff brilliantly had noticed that. And also the fact that both of the Leeuwenhoek and Vermeer's father, that's their trade. This is also talking about their own biography in a way, right? And the revelation that in something so ordinary as to trading material, textile, there's actually, again, presence of the lurking of that divine plan inside, divine construction, microbiology, right? Now,
You can still get those linen testers, by the way. I have one down in my studio, the original microscope. You can buy them as linen testers. Yeah, they haven't changed probably much since their time.
And Dr. Pepper had told me that the very first actually test that he teaches in his microbiology class, the book, the volume, How to Teach Microbiology, begins with looking at 3 threads under the microscope. So this is really fascinating. Now, Leeuwenhoek was quite secretive about this. Much royalty had traveled to see his experiments, but he wouldn't show the best thing. He wouldn't show his best secrets. He was very protective, and it was only in 20th century they finally figured out how it is that he made that magnification possible and that clarity possible. So he was interesting. I have a feeling, I'm totally making this up, but I just have a feeling that he trusted Vermeer, and he showed him what he didn't show the Dutch royalty or Peter the Great traveled to meet him. But I feel like we're seeing his secret in Vermeer's art. Now, this could be totally made up, but this is what makes it fun.
I think you're absolutely. They were very close, and I can imagine those kind of conversations and interactions, or even running from one studio to the next to share the latest
and there's a proof
revelation,
how they were close. If you're wondering, did Zhenya just make that all up and Jeff believed her? No, there is a proof. When Vermeer died, and we'll talk about it in just a moment, his executor of his estate was Leeuwenhoek. You don't just appoint a random guy that means that he's a close family friend, that he knows the family intimately. So this is really a document, a proof of a solid relationship, right? And this particular painting plays a part in that story. So from the tiniest painting by Vermeer to the largest painting by Vermeer, this is 47 inches by 39 inches. I believe it might be even larger than the view of the Delft or thereabouts. It's in Vienna. If you haven't been to Vienna, to Kunsthistorisches Museum, one of my favorite places to go. Thanks, Mom, for taking us there a couple of summers ago. And that painting hangs there, and that painting will always hang there, but it didn't always hang there. It hung in Vermeer's house. He painted it for himself, and he never sold it. That comes with an interesting story, because a little bit before this painting was created in about 1666, there was a very important diplomat with 2 friends who traveled to Vermeer, because the rumor started to spread that there is this amazing Delft painter, right? He wasn't as famous as Rembrandt, but the rumors is a small part of Netherlands, right? And they traveled to Delft to see him. They come into his studio, and the letter says, the document says, which the diplomat wrote afterwards, kind of like a diary entry, to his disappointment, there was no art in the house. Nothing in Vermeer's studio. And Vermeer, being so kind of shy about it, says, well, just go to the bread maker, because he owns 3 of my paintings, and there you'll see on display 3 of my paintings. And so the Dutchman traveled to the bread maker. There were fabulous images, but he was kind of almost taken aback, almost, I think, didn't believe Vermeer that he even made it, right? And he traveled back without making this important commission. So we think that this particular painting was made by Vermeer to always have something in his studio, to a show-off piece, right? And if he's going to have a show-off piece, this is different from anything he's ever painted. This is actually not about the milkmaid. This is not about Delft. This is about the art making itself. This is about the painter. This is about the practice, right? Now, why do you think there was no paintings in his house? Well, he painted about 3 images a year, and quickly they exited to private collections. So his technique is painstaking, right? So he had very little to show in production, unlike maybe an artist like Hals or Rembrandt, who are a quicker painter, right? A different type of attitude, different type of technique. Now, let's look at this carefully. This is really exciting. First of all, if you notice that there's a curtain in front of this image, and I need to share with you a tradition in European art that paintings were presented in collections behind curtains. And this was for numerous reasons. One is just to protect from the grime, right? Another to protect the image from those who are not supposed to see it. For instance, if there was racy subject matter and women are not supposed to look at it, only men after cappuccino and wine, right, to come together and to enjoy it. Jeff, are you there? I lost Jeff for a moment, but I hope
I'm here.
Okay.
All of a sudden, my neighborhood became a busy freeway, so I needed to shut the window.
So we
I
see
needed
here,
to go to the window.
So we see here another painting by Gabriel Mitsu, who is also an incredible Dutch painter, and he shows you a woman peeking behind a curtain at a work of art on the wall, right? A very similar wall to Vermeer's paintings. So I just wanted to kind of show you the context. And so here we see her peeking at the art, and then we see this painting that's being revealed to us by unseen hand of Vermeer. The curtain is drawn back by someone who, right? As if to say, since we're pulling the curtain, we're no longer looking at the painting, we're looking at the reality. We're breaking that pictorial space, the illusionary space, and we're walking in. It's an invitation, right? This is just such a gallant, beautiful, illusionistic gesture, right? Something in front of the work of art to make the work of art look like not a work of art, but reality. Make sense?
Very much so.
And as we walk in, let's see. As we walk in, we see the artist. Many people speculated, could this be a self-portrait? We cannot clearly say, no way to tell. There was a famous self-portrait by Vermeer that is described, but it vanished. There's no way we can actually know what Vermeer looked like. This artist, if we go back and look at him, is dressed not in the most conducive way to paint. Although if you look at Jeff, you might be deceived because he looks but that's how you would paint. But I bet you that's not actually how he looks when he's painting in the studio. So look at those red breeches and white silver stockings and slashed height of the fashion doublet. I mean, just incredible. And as we get closer, he's painting a model. So this is a painting not only about the artist. This is a painting very much about the process, the relationship between the artist and their model. I know some of my models may be watching today. Mark, if you are, a shout out to you. The relationship between the artist and the model is really something very important. Now, this is one other things that you add to our Vermeer mysteries because we do not know ever who he's painting. All these women in his painting, some look familiar to us, some look similar. We do not know. We can only guess. Some people suggested this could be his wife or even his older daughter posing in this painting as a muse. Now, what I love here, that you actually see not just the model, and she's it's not a portrait. She's definitely acting. She's an actor. She holds a trumpet, a book. She's not dressed very Dutch. She has laurel wreath that she's wearing on her head. So she's definitely posing as some kind of a muse. And then what you see is, if Vermeer saw that, how would he paint that? Because we see actually a painter's painting, right? And if we assume that this is a practice similar to Vermeer's, you see things that just blow my mind, because as a teacher, I get really excited. First of all, you'll notice that he started by a neutral background, yet created a kind of a gray tone, a gray scale on his work of art. I don't know if I go a little bit closer. We'll see. And then he's holding his brush by a mole stick, that long stick that's black with an end, leather end there. That's a way to stabilize his hand so he could draw with paint. He's not using drawing. He's drawing with paint precisely by stabilizing his arm. And below his wonderful sleeve, you can actually see the white lines. So he had outlined his painting with white oil paint to set up the composition. And then we see that he's not painting that whole room, that the room is real. Remember, he's pretending the room is real, but he's painting a portrait, and he's really focusing on the girl, right? But where does he put the color? Not in her face. What is he painting? Jeff?
Painting the laurel.
Yes, he's painting laurel. Laurel is a symbol of victory. It is as if to say that act of painting is victorious. He is the king. He is the one who deserves those laurel leaves, right? So it becomes a painting of a painting of a painting inside the painting, right? With many messages in the way that you can interpret it. So also it has been identified not so long ago that this woman, this model that she's wearing this outfit, that she's taken out of a book it's called Iconologia by Cesare Ripas. It's a 16th century book that would have been very famous. And in that book, the artist had created emblems for certain type of personalities. And there was particular emblem for Clio. Clio is considered the muse of history. And how is Clio identified? Because before that, we just said, oh, a muse, right? She's particularly identified by a large book which represents history, the trumpet, which is the success of the history going on, the laurel wreath, again, victorious, and those three items together really identify Clio. Now, this is really interesting, and here I guess I have a close-up of to show you the process. But this is really interesting. So history, we're going to keep this in mind for just a couple of slides later. But I also want to show you, since we're talking about Vermeer's process, and to put a doubt in your mind for using camera obscura and to propose something opposite to you, is that remember there is this map. I want you to pay attention to this amazing Dutch map in this image. And next to Clio is actually we'll find that the signature of Vermeer is present there, but I want you to pay attention to the bottom. Sometimes we still hang curtains this way, right? Or tapestry this way. And there's a little pinhole next to that image. So I want to attract your attention as we go closer. Recognize that bottom right there, that object that I just showed you? There is a little pinhole in the surface, not painted, an actual pinhole that's in the surface of the painting. And these pinholes are present at least 11 times in all of Vermeer's paintings. And what the art historians figured out, that this is a vanishing point. And if you put a little bit, like a push pin with thread, and you stretch the thread, it helps you create the perspective within the room. And this is a very interesting method that comes from the actually map makers of the time. And remember that big map present there. You put chalk on your thread. So you dip it in chalk and you stretch the thread very taut from the position of vanishing point. And then you simply pluck it like a string of guitar. And when it hits the painting, it creates a perfect line. So you can quickly create perspective lines and orchestrate your painting, right? Composition with what seems to be a complex perspective, but actually quite simple. It's a one-point vanishing point with a flat parallel wall to us and not difficult to construct. Right? So again, illusion within illusion. And these pinholes within, that physical pinholes within Vermeer's paintings point to the fact that he's constructing these compositions by hand and not projection. What I was trying to show with Leeuwenhoek, that he is looking through glass, he is looking through magnification to see the world in a new way and to paint those effects, but not necessarily to cheat, right? Or to create a shortcut or deeper reason, right? That is my proposal to you. Now, this painting again stays in Vermeer's life, extremely important to him. And when he dies, his wife, he's a very poor man when he dies. He only died at the age of 43, which we'll come back to. But his wife wants to hold on. This is the only painting basically she has, and she wants to hold on to it because it was so important to the family. And she tries to make a switcheroo, and she sells it to her mother, to Vermeer's mother-in-law, but it is quickly discovered, and it was forced that she would actually sell it to pay for Vermeer's debts. Vermeer had an outstanding debt of 600 guilders to the bread maker. 600 guilders, you can actually buy a house at the time, a modest house for that. So it's incredible how a man so brilliant would have fallen into such need. So I show you here his signature also to attract your attention. And there comes the drama. Our tours would not be without drama, because this painting, probably the most amazing, important painting, not only in the world, but to Vermeer himself. He signs Johannes Vermeer, I Vermeer, on the map. When it was lost and rediscovered, and then when it was rediscovered, when they wanted to sell it, remember, they didn't care much about Vermeer in 18th century anymore. So they thought, how do we make more money? Well, let's put a famous artist's name on it. And the more famous artist from Delft was De Hoek. And so a second signature was signed right next to Vermeer, just ignoring him, De Hoek, which would have been horrible because De Hoek was Vermeer's rival, somebody that probably Vermeer thought inferior to himself. And all of a sudden, De Hoek gets to claim this painting, right? Very quickly, as actually the De Hoek signature gets taken away, and finally we find out that this is Vermeer's painting, it becomes a jewel within, it ends up in a collection in Vienna, and in a it's displayed in a museum. And it becomes so famous, so many articles are written about it, so much attention, that it actually gets attention from the Nazi. And Goering, who was a right hand of Hitler, decides to buy it for himself and trick Hitler, so that because Hitler himself was extremely interested in the art and wanted to amass the hugest art collection, the best art collection in the world. And imagine trying to trick Hitler. I mean, such guts. And Goering actually buys this painting for his collection, and the museum is horrified because they think they'll never see it again, and they write a complaint to Hitler. And so I told you that there's going to be storytelling. I can't resist to tell you stories then and now. And Hitler says, no, that's horrible. We must keep the art where it belongs. It will never be sold to Goering. Don't worry about it. The museum is relieved, but only to find out Hitler did this to buy it for himself. And Hitler buys this painting and becomes the most important painting in his collection. Now, he was obsessed, a very strange, deranged man who was also equally obsessed in creating the most important museum in the world for the people. And he even published a catalog and put this very painting on top of this catalog, that this represents my future collection. Now, of course, as Hitler loses power and the bombing is going off and the Americans storming in with the Russians into the various cities, they, in one of the salt mines, discover the most amazing underground collection of paintings that were hidden. And among them, you see what? You see our Art of Painting by Vermeer, untouched, unscratched, in perfect condition, and it is returned finally to Vienna, where it's now, it'll never leave the museum, right? It's on display proudly. But what's so amazing about it, because if you remember, what is this painting about? The muse of history, the victory of history. It is as if Vermeer predicted history triumphing over evil. Incredible history of this, within history of this very own painting. What do you think, Jeff?
I love it. It is a fascinating story, the whole Monuments Men, and there's a wonderful book called The Rape of Europa that documents this tragic but also thrilling history of art during World War II.
And it just blows my mind that the painting should be dedicated to art and history, and that it should be victorious, right? It's almost like he's looking into the looking glass. We talked about the magic glass of Leeuwenhoek, like the magician, right? The art will triumph.
Art will
Amazing.
triumph. Yes. Yeah.
And in fact, that
Absolutely.
another man was signed to this painting, and his name is restored. Vermeer gets forgotten. All these layers that are associated
Yeah.
with this
There's
message
an
traveling through.
an eternal quality that he's communicating about the value of art that we still share today.
Amazing, right? So I
Yeah.
just had to share this. So we come to towards the end of our time together. We'll look at a couple of more paintings if you don't mind. We will be amiss if we don't look at the music and letter writing in Vermeer, because these are the two subjects that are at the core of his making. And also because music is very important in my family home. My daughter is an amazing flutist, and I listen. All of my students here are practicing. She's forbidden during Invisible Museum tours to practice, but usually in my studio you'd always hear her. And what I love about it is that Vermeer shared an attitude that music is healing. Music is restorative, which is a nice transition from the previous drama that we just talked about. And as we look a little bit closer, there is a woman at the virginal, right? This is the kind of an early piano, pre-piano instrument. And on its lid, when you open it, there is a message. And there's always message within the message within the message, as we discover in Vermeer. And it says, music is the companion of joy, balm for sorrow. Right? And a beautiful message, right? I always feel like when I'm down, I hear my daughter play flute. It always inspires me. It always gives me hope in a nonverbal way that only music can. But what's also very interesting, this is not where we stop. If you look to the right, sorry, let's go back for a second. If you look to the right, you see my cursor. There is a painting that we see at the corner. Do you notice that?
Yep.
So Vermeer gives us just enough glimpse to identify what's inside it. And there is a man with his arms twisted back and a woman holding him, and he wears shackles on his arms. And this is basically an image of Roman charity, a subject that was very dear to the artist. And this very same painting we know was in a collection of Vermeer's mother-in-law, because Vermeer's mother-in-law was actually quite a wealthy woman, and she collected art. And so we know that he's actually using a painting from her collection to put into his own painting. We don't know if it was by Caspar the Grayer, probably one of the Caravaggisti, one of the followers of Caravaggio, but the image would have been like this. And I just wanted to show it to you. It is the oddest, in my opinion, subject in art history, but made sense to a lot of artists. And this is about the father who's being put to jail by the Romans and sentenced to death by starvation. And his daughter sneaks into jail and breastfeeds him to life. It's a really odd subject matter. But it is considered the Roman charity, that charity that how would a daughter save her father? What would she sacrifice? How would she nourish? So the idea for this painting is really the nourishment. Remember the woman, the message on that virginal, right? The message that music will save you. Music will nourish your soul. And then we have this wonderful relationship between the characters. So I want you to pay attention who is looking at whom. So at one glance, you see the woman kind of not paying attention to the man. He is talking. You can almost imagine perhaps he's telling or explaining the message in that odd painting, the Roman charity, what it signifies. And she seems oblivious to him, but the truth is revealed in the mirror. In the mirror, we see actually that the woman is looking at him and listening very attentively. This is very interesting. Again, think about mirrors and lenses. They are related, and it was considered in alchemy and Kabbalah that the mirror always tells the truth. We have that mirror, mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest of them all, right? The mirror is what will reveal the truth to you if one does not want to say it. But if you look even closer in that mirror, and why I wanted to share it with you, what we see beyond the woman is the artist easel, the legs of the artist easel. So this is, we could say, the only self-portrait of Vermeer that survives. His presence, right? If I back away, his presence within the painting. Isn't that amazing, Jeff?
It is fascinating. It's a painting that's full of little gems like that, isn't it?
Right, and so that idea that he is painting, he's watching this, he's observing this, and so many ways that you could travel to another artist's point of view, or his point of view, or her point of view. This is a Hollywood film. This is very complex, right? At a glance, seeming so kind of a genre scene, almost empty, but full of ways you could travel, full of ideas for conversation.
Doesn't
All
it
right.
bring to mind a couple other famous paintings? It brings to mind Velasquez Las Meninas and the
Yes.
reflection of Velasquez in his painting, and then also Manet's painting. I've got to believe that Manet was looking at Velasquez and maybe at this painting for his bar at Folie Bergère, and the
100%
reflection of the barmaid.
because of course he's also reading Proust. So this is all this is all part of that cult mania. This is where our tour
Yeah,
comes
yeah. I
together.
mean, this is a
But
wonderful device that Vermeer uses, and another reason why you could make the argument that he was not using the camera obscura to make the painting. Maybe inspired by the lens, certainly familiar with it because of his friendship and what it revealed in terms of the science of light. But this painting is a complete construction by the artist. This is not something that exists in nature. This is something that existed in the mind of Vermeer, and he fills it full of
they,
so many little surprises, or I would call them rewards for the observant.
you know, you're so right because I was reading about the Dutch historians and they said that this type of floor was only reserved for town halls and the wealthiest homes, and no way could fit in this marble floor into Vermeer's home. Also, the Dutch townhouse only had very small windows and wouldn't have this huge space with all that light. It's much darker home. And
Mhm,
even in the history painting here, you see that chandelier? No
mhm.
way this could be afforded by Vermeer. So all of this is his construction. He's not
Yeah,
projecting anything. He's actually projecting it out of his imagination, almost like a collage. I've seen it here, I've seen it there, and
yeah.
putting it together. I mean, this is a complete construction. Ceci n'est pas réalité, right? This is
Yes.
not reality.
This is
Uh,
not reality, no. No.
so,
And when you really look at it too, the shadows, he chooses the shadows that he wants, he exaggerates others, he omits shadows that you would think would be there. There's just a wonderful, I don't know, attention to storytelling that goes beyond what we see in the physical world.
yeah, we are always so in tune with each other, with the way we understand art. It's such a pleasure, and yet brings something so different. So I love your comments, Jeff. Thank you for that. And but also, just very quickly for Velasquez, if you don't know the image, please look at Velasquez Las Meninas, which is his famous court painting where he's standing proudly in the front with a huge painting, turning the painting around. So we can't see what the painting is, but we guess that the painting is actually the painting we're looking at that he painted. Very complicated. I know that sounds abstract, but he's very present there, and he's dressed facing us, not from the back, but he himself is from the front.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful self-portrait. But what's so different here in the mirror, there in the mirror you see royalty in the background. Here in the mirror you see the foot of Vermeer's easel. He does not reveal himself. A great magician never reveals his secret, right?
Right,
So
right.
it's like Velasquez, but it's diametrically
It's
opposed
very
to
different.
Velasquez.
Yeah, philosophically very different.
Right? It's a different personality. So we go back to that counterfeiting, that illusion master. I think of David Copperfield, right? Of this great illusionist, right? He's thinking of
Hmm.
art as illusion. God is a great illusionist with his microscopic beings, right? Okay, so I put this in here because you cannot talk about Vermeer without putting this painting in, The Girl with a Pearl Earring. It is considered the Dutch Mona Lisa. It hangs in Hague in the same museum, Maurice House, as the Delft View. And I have absolutely nothing to tell you about it because when I look at it, my mouth drops and I become silent. I just become speechless. So I show it here just because it's so beautiful. Let's just silently say, wow. And the only thing I have to say about her, a couple of things, is as you close in, I was in that museum, I stood in front of her, and I just share a little personal anecdote. when I stared at her, she returns your gaze in such a particular way that you feel that only you and her exist, as if Vermeer wasn't even there. It's just about you, a viewer, and her, and she exists for you. And so it becomes incredibly uncomfortable because once you lock the gaze, you cannot turn away and leave that room. You feel like you walk out on just a new best friend without being able to communicate with her. And in fact, if you look very closely, her mouth is parted. Not only she's looking at you, but you see the wetness of the lips and almost the saliva a little bit, and she's talking. She's telling you something. So it's a listening painting. You have to kind of connect and listen with her. The other thing I wanted to mention with you, and so I stood about 5 hours until I said, sorry, I've got to go, right? And I turned around and ran out of that room and felt guilty to this day, right? But it's a painting you can't turn away from. I've never experienced it with any other work of art. Well, if you turn away, you become a very rude person. But here what I wanted to notice, there's some damage that you could see through the cracks. Terrible, of course, for the painting condition, but great for the artist because we could see that underneath her light skin is actually dark tone, and that one of the process, the way that Vermeer painted, was painting on darker surfaces, on black and blue. And what's amazing about him, I mentioned the ultramarine, which is made from lapis lazuli, the most expensive art material, more expensive than gold, actually. And Vermeer paints it again, not only on top of the objects like other artists, but underneath. He painted ultramarine blue underneath to experiment how the light will glow when you add the white on top of it. This takes such generosity and scientific exploration that blows my mind because he himself is incredibly poor at the time. And to put that expensive material, it's like putting your fur in your underwear where nobody could see it, right? It's just reversing. Blue is reserved for show off. And he puts it on the inside of the painting to create the glow. I know Jeff is going to love that.
Absolutely. It is a marvelous painting, isn't it? There's so much feeling and depth. And just the way, the softness, I think this painting really shows off his skill. No hard edges. The colors define, the light defines the shape. It's just a beautiful, beautiful work.
And no edges. Look at the contour of the nose. You will not find it. Look at the contour of the lips. You will not find it. Look at the contour of her cheek. It's softened by glazes so that it becomes, this is perhaps why it's called the Dutch Mona Lisa, because that same kind of a sfumato effect, only even more beautiful, I would say.
And the use of complementary colors, both in the highlights as well as the shadows. The shadows, we expect to find them, but he uses these complementary colors in the highlights that just really radiate.
Yes, symphonies of red, yellow, and blue. It's almost what you can dilute every single one of his paintings. As complex as they seem, there's always that complementary in-your-face red, yellow, blue palette. And like you said, within the shadows and light. As simple and as profound as that. Now, we conclude with a painting that's very important, I find very important to Vermeer, and it's a woman holding a balance. And I haven't mentioned too much about Katharina Bolms, who was the wife of Vermeer. Vermeer met Katharina and fell in love with her. She must have been a beautiful woman, and he was smitten with her and wanted to marry her. Her mother had doubts because Vermeer came from a much lower class family with very little money, but most importantly, for the Dutch at the time, Katharina was Catholic. And Vermeer was Protestant, so it's like, no, impossible. So Katharina's mother says, well, if you're very serious about my daughter, you will have to convert. And we have a document that survived of conversion of Vermeer, and that he became a Catholic person, a Catholic painter in a way. Now, this is a big deal at the time because the Dutch had just finally got rid of the dominance of Habsburg rule, the Spanish rulers that were Catholics, like with Velasquez, right? And this national pride came into showing we are nothing but, we're Protestant, we're different. Catholics were not allowed to hold public posts, nor they were allowed to practice their religion in the open. They bribed little spaces, public spaces where we can go and Catholic would create invisible church, invisible museum tour, within the space and hold their rituals. They usually paid off the government, so it became almost like taxation, and the government would half close their eyes. But this was a dangerous practice and not a common standard practice. And we see a shift in Vermeer's art that we see within this very Dutch national everyday Dutch subject matter, the milkwoman as a symbol of Dutchness, a whole different subject of Catholic art and philosophy coming through. And we see it in this painting, as this painting is not of a woman holding a balance, but this is a painting about the last judgment. Behind her again, Vermeer very prominently includes an image, a Catholic painter's image. This is a very Catholic subject matter of God judging human beings at the end of the world. And this idea that those who sinned will go to hell and those who are good will go to heaven, and he's dividing the good from the bad, is a Catholic idea. The Protestants did not actually even believe in hell. They believed that hell is being away from God, being separated from God. You don't need to go to a place where devils poke you with forks, right? So this is a very, very, very overtly Catholic message. And what we see, what's so amazing, that the woman here is first of all pregnant, very clear here, no debate, and she holds the balance over her child almost weighing her child's soul, and it's in perfect equilibrium. As the light is streaming through the window, this moment of peace and quiet, and there's almost like a man coming in, there's almost like a shadow of this man coming through. Talk about playing with shadows, right? Kind of an invisible presence. One can think of Immaculate Conception again, the moment of Mary being pregnant with Christ and this perfect still moment of equilibrium in the modern day of Vermeer. Now, a painting like this, and here I show you a little closer, there's God separating the souls and judging. A painting like that would have been portrayed by a painter like Roger van der Weyden, and below God we see Archangel Michael. Michael is the one who holds the scale and weighs the soul. And this woman in Vermeer's painting holds his place. She holds, blocking the angel within the painting behind her. She is the judge. She is the weigher of the souls here, where Archangel Michael would have stood. So I just thought it was just such an interesting and poetic image that I couldn't help to show in a little bit of a political tilt here, a political and religious bend that we haven't perhaps explored yet. And finally, we would be again amiss if we did not explore Vermeer's letters. There's always a subject of writing the letter, receiving the letter, opening the letter, reading the letter. And here I call to your poetic soul and thinking as how else to describe a great painting than a letter. A great painting is a letter to the viewer. It is a letter through time with a message that you will read. I may try to explain it, Jeff may try to explain it, but it's really a message only for you and how you will read it. So letter writing, I think letter receiving is really important to Vermeer. Here in this painting, we find also a hint of another painting in the background. Do you notice how there's another image there? And that image, you see how there's a painting behind them. Mm-hmm. That image has been identified as Finding of Moses, attributed to, actually they were even able to attribute which artist had painted, Peter Lely. Now, the finding of Moses, sorry to take you back to the Bible, but we got to travel and hear all these stories. The finding of Moses is a very interesting subject. If you remember, Jeff, that's the moment where the Pharaoh had cursed and said that all of the firstborn boys by Jews will be murdered. And in order to save Moses, his mother puts him in a basket and puts him in the water in Egypt. And the basket floats to the maidens at the shore. And who finds it? The very daughter of the Pharaoh. This is the moment at which the baby is taken out of the basket. And she says, can't we keep it? Can't I adopt this baby? And what this shows, why is this moment important, is basically showing two opposing religions working in unison. Like God is shared, the divine plan is shared. But the very Egyptian Pharaoh who wants to destroy the Jews, and here his very daughter is saying a child is a child. And there's like this coming together. So if we think about the previous painting, right, and how the Catholic and the Protestant within Vermeer is coming together, and then we go to the subject matter, right? We see another parallel of this kind of religious tolerance. This is also becomes very particular even later to the Dutch nation. But we come to the very end of our time together. I hope you're very sad about that. And I show this painting. I show this painting for a reason. This could take another hour to just talk about it. But I want to emphasize that almost every painting by Vermeer is signed. And I just want to show you a typical Vermeer signature because he really experiments. So above the hat of that girl with the red hat, we find the IVM. So VM for Van der Meer, right, from the lake, and I, not for Jan Vermeer, as some of you may know his name. That is a butchered pronunciation of Johannes. And Vermeer would have been terrified that on some of the modern art books, you see Jan Vermeer. That is, again, one of the myths that is not true about Vermeer. That is not even his name. His name is Johannes. So IVM, this beautiful symbol, appears in 25 out of 35 paintings that we know by Vermeer. Very important for him to insert himself. And we come to the end of his life, and his passing is just as mysterious as everything else I shared about him. One day, at the age of 43, he decides not to live anymore. And this is in petition to her creditors. His wife that we mentioned earlier describes his death. During the ruinous war with France, he not only was unable to sell any of his art, but also, to his great detriment, was left sitting with the paintings of other masters that he was dealing in. As a result, and owing to the great burden of his children, having no means of his own, he lapsed into such decay and decadence, which he had so taken to heart, that as if he had fallen into frenzy, in a day and a half, he went from being healthy to being dead. When we read these words, really strange passing. What happened to Vermeer? How do you go at 43 from being healthy to being dead? And then we have another document of the inventory, and where the inventor signs in his studio there were 2 chairs, 2 painter's easels, 3 palettes, 10 canvases, a desk, an oak pool table, a small wooden cupboard with drawers, and roomage not worthy being itemized. So our greatest artist is basically left with a bunch of trash and old used items and nothing to show for his life. I bring you to the very last image of Vermeer, again looking back at that mysterious girl with the pearl earring. And now, with everything that you know about him, if you could imagine this painting could talk, what is she saying to you? And with that, I end and see if we have any comments or questions from our audience.
Well, we have lots. There was a lot of interest in the camera Obscura topic that we hit on earlier. Whether or not he used it, how it may have impacted his art. I feel strongly that he certainly was aware of it, saw its use, You can't be friends with the inventor of the microscope and not have experience with lenses and the refraction of light. But I don't believe, as Hockney has proposed, that he used it as a tool in his studio to copy with. I think more it was he studied its effects and saw how things could be represented in light and in color, and how that became for him a way to communicate more effectively not only the reality or the illusion of reality, but his narrative overall. But that's my opinion.
Oh, I see some of the questions in the chats, and one of them
Mhm.
said it's interesting that he actually never taught. That's another mystery. Not only he himself, some art historians suggest, was self-taught. He never had students. He never gave that knowledge to anybody else. Another mystery, which is very unlike of the Dutch masters at the time.
Well, it was a way they subsidized their income, right? And so you look at his output, and I can see in his personality in other ways too, where he had no interest in that. He
Or was he private
dedicated
about?
100 per, yeah, he was a private person. He wouldn't share his paintings sometimes with people who wanted to buy them. He was very closed individual, I think, emotionally to the world at large. So I can see him having no interest, even with the need for the income, having no interest in having students.
Right. Anything else, Jeff, that any comments also from
The pinhole was really something that lots of folks look at. There's somebody who stated that pinhole may have been used to recalibrate the camera in certain areas, but I think the chalk lines, and there's enough
yes,
research of the
it actually is a
X-rays of the
vanishing point.
paintings to show that he's
Yeah.
using it as a physical tool to create the perspective. And you can also see how it evolved over time. In some of his earlier paintings, his vanishing points to the side to create those tiles are very close in, creating this kind of optical effect that makes the depth a little awkward. And later on, he brings the vanishing points off and gives us a much more believable perspective on the floors and different places. And again, with the camera obscura, you wouldn't have had that kind of oscillation or change. It would have been a consistent reproduction.
And I also my most my biggest proof is we all have projectors. Go ahead and project and paint like Vermeer. Although it seems Vermeer, the film sets up that very
Yeah.
objective, and he
Theory,
tries to
yeah.
make a
Yeah.
Vermeer. But for most of us, if we try to copy a Vermeer, it's nearly impossible. And it's one thing to see it in the film; it's another to see it up close, because
Right.
Vermeer really stands on its own, not just in its photographic construction, but in that incredible technique of abstraction, which is absolutely mind-blowing. And
Well,
that
the other thing
glow,
too, yeah, yeah,
that
and
glow.
in Tim's movie, we have the advantage of modern lighting. Vermeer would have needed to paint in the dark or with a candle.
Yeah, I see a question from Lev. Did Vermeer ever paint with a candlelight? And it's so interesting. Remember the art of painting, his monumental painting of basically the artist. There is a chandelier in the room, but there are no candles in the chandeliers, as if he's trying to tell you, I'm not projecting, right? He's eliminating the source of light other than that window, that mysterious
Right,
window
right.
that symbolizes the light of his wall.
You can see it in the color he chooses for light reflections too. They're
Oh,
always kind of a turquoise blue. These beautiful little dabs of turquoise that are the reflection of daylight, not candlelight or man-made light. It's really evident, especially in that last painting you showed with the red hat, the little turquoise blue in her
oh,
eye.
that's amazing. And also, I see a question: which book of Vermeer do you recommend? I recommend light reading. I'm joking because I can barely hold this up. This is a Taschen book, The Complete Works of Vermeer, with amazing illustrations. This is really a treasure trove when you go in and the details fold out, and great, great, great writing, just remarkable details. You would love this book. So Taschen, you can send me a check for promoting you, but
And
but
if you
this is
don't,
truly.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
if you,
truly the best book out there that I love by Vermeer. But
yeah.
there are many, many texts. There's also Vermeer's Women, which is an incredible catalog that I highly
Yeah.
recommend. and just really focuses on what does the woman mean in Vermeer's art. And speaking of Vermeer's women and women, next time we will see you on February 15th. Make a date with us because I am planning with Jeff to celebrate a Valentine's Day with you a day later with the subject of love. So make sure you do not miss our next Invisible Museum tour on February 15th.
Thank you, as always, Zhenya. This was fantastic and such a wonderful subject to talk about. And we will continue the dialogue, folks. Keep the comments coming on Facebook. Zhenya is wonderful about going back and answering questions. So it doesn't have to end here. And certainly it lives on our Facebook page, World Talents North America, so you can view the part you might have missed or look at it over again to learn even more. Just like in Vermeer's paintings, each time you view them, you see more and you learn more. So please follow us again.
And share it with your friends. If you enjoyed it today, please post it, share it. We'd love it. Is a free program, and we'd love as many people as possible to watch it and delight and interact with us.
Thank you again, Zhenya. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And signing off, we will see you next month. Bye-bye.